Greetings people, 'tis I, 480 Volts, and welcome back to another episode of 480 Reviews. Now I know it's been months since my last review, and I really hate that it's been so long, but let's just say that this game took a little longer than most to capture my interest and compel me to keep playing. Let me also say that I have recently expanded my gaming setup, and I have been somewhat distracted enjoying many different games that I, for the longest time, did not have the ability to play. Needless to say, I had some wonderful ideas for reviews way down the line on this channel. And now let's get back into the Zelda series with the N64's main Zelda title, The Legend of Zelda, the Wind Instrument of Time. Okay, before we get too deep into this, there are a couple of elephants up in this room that I need to address. The first one being the pronunciation. Is it Ocarina or Ocarina? For years, I assumed that the real-life instrument was pronounced Ocarina, but I've heard many people, when referring to this game, pronounce it Ocarina. In fact, I've probably heard equal amount of people pronounce it both ways, so I'm just going to randomly pick one and stick with it from here on out. Ocarina will be assigned a value of 1, Ocarina will be assigned a value of 2. Random number generator go time, and there you have it, Ocarina it is. With the release of the N64 and many of Nintendo's favorite franchises like Mario, Donkey Kong, and Bomberman making the jump into 3D, of course it was only logical to have a 3D Zelda game as well. Of course, things would be slightly different here considering Zelda was mainly focused on topographical exploration, which in my mind would be easier to translate into 3D than say a platformer like Super Mario Bros, but hey, I'm not a game developer nor do I play one on TV. In point of fact, one of the more daunting obstacles during this game's conception was the large open world standard set by previous Zelda games. The team, with Shigeru Miyamoto serving as lead producer and supervisor, was worried that translating all of this with 3D graphics would take too much memory, so much so that they actually considered making the final castle the main junction hub for the whole game with portals leading into different stages, similar to how Super Mario 64's world was handled. Thankfully, the team was able to overcome this hurdle, perhaps a bit too far. The main overworld is just a bit too wide and empty for my taste, but we'll get into that later. The game was released for the Nintendo 64 in late 1998. Interestingly enough, development for this game was being done as early as development for Super Mario 64, which was released in 1996, meaning the team spent a considerable amount of time making this one. I'll definitely admit that while I do have my own issues with this game, it does feel very solid and polished, and not at all rushed. Now for the story, which brings me to another elephant I need to address: the timeline. How does this game tie in with other Zelda games? Answer: don't worry about it. Historians and archaeologists have studied fossilized remains, stone tablets, and ancient hieroglyphs in an attempt to piece together some kind of canonical continuity between games, but trust me when I say it's much less of a headache if you just ignore it. If you care, this game is meant to be some sort of prequel set several hundred years before the events of A Link to the Past, which was some kind of prequel to the first Zelda game. It's the same land of Hyrule, but it's a different Link and Zelda. Also, I guess it's only fair to tell you that if you don't want stuff spoiled for you, check the timestamps in the description to see when I'm finished talking about story, but honestly, it's a Nintendo game. How much are you expecting? The only real major revelation in this game's plot that I can think of shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who has played any of the Smash Bros. Games after the first one, but hey, if you still want to discover things for yourself, well, there you go. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into this. The game begins in the small forest village of Kokiri, a village populated entirely by children, each of which has their own little fairy to guide them through life, save for one little boy who has no fairy to speak of. The great Deku Tree, which watches over the village, sends a fairy named Navi, a little on the nose there, Nintendo, to fetch this little boy whom the great Deku Tree believes to be the chosen savior of the land of Hyrule. Navi awakens the boy, Link, from a nightmare in which he witnesses a rather muscular and buff woman and a pretty little girl escaping on horseback from a sinister figure. Yeah, totally nothing significant about that at all. Nope, not in the slightest. Navi tells Link to hurry to the Great Deku Tree. Link does so after fetching a nearby little sword and shield. The Great Deku Tree has apparently been cursed by some great evil and bids Link to enter the tree and break the curse. Link does so, and then the tree gives him a little bit more information. The man who cursed the tree, apparently the same sinister man Link saw in his dreams, is trying to get to the Sacred Realm, the birthplace of the Triforce, which is of course the balance of wisdom, power, and courage laid in the very foundation of Hyrule by the ancient goddesses. Even though Link has broken the curse, the Deku Tree is still going to die anyway, because of course he is, which seems to make our first dungeon area completely pointless, but it's okay, because the fact that Link managed to beat a giant mutant spider thingy proves that he is the hero destined to save Hyrule from ultimate evil. With his dying breath, the Great Deku Tree gives Link the sacred stone of the forest and tells him to go to Hyrule Castle and meet Princess Zelda. Link and Navi set out to do so, but not before Link's best friend, a little girl named Saria, gives him her fairy ocarina as a memento of their friendship. Link and Navi are successful in sneaking in the Hyrule Hyrule Castle where they meet Princess Zelda, whom Link recognizes as the little girl in his dreams. Seeing that Link has a fairy, Zelda realizes that he came from Kokiri, which, by the way, the children are not allowed to leave that village, so no one ever really sees them. Zelda has apparently been having her own nightmares in which she meets a boy from Kokiri with the sacred stone of the forest. Link shows her his stone and she relates the legend of the Triforce to him. When the goddesses formed the Triforce, it was established that if someone with a righteous heart were to obtain the artifact, it would begin a prosperous age in Hyrule, but if someone with an evil heart were to obtain it, it would begin a dark age of Hyrule. To protect it from evil, the goddesses sealed the Triforce in the sacred realm. Zelda says that in her dreams she saw dark clouds consuming Hyrule. She believes that someone with an evil heart is trying to obtain the Triforce. Her instincts point her to a man named Ganondorf, who, if you've played A Link to the Past or can just tell by the simple fact that his name has Ganon in it, you ought to know whom he is inevitably going to become. Link glimpses Ganondorf from a distance and recognizes him as the evil man in his dreams. Zelda tells Link that the entrance to the sacred realm lies in the nearby Temple of Time, but is behind a door, the seal of which can only be broken by a stone that Link possesses, two other stones similar to it, and the royal treasure of Hyrule, the Ocarina of Time. Zelda, who holds the Ocarina of Time, entreats Link to find the other two sacred stones. Her personal bodyguard and attendant, Impa, a member of the tribe of ninjas known as the Sheikah, whom Link recognizes as the muscular woman from his dreams, safely escorts him out of the castle where he begins his journey to obtain the other two sacred stones. With all three stones in hand, Link returns to Hyrule Castle where he sees Impa and Zelda escaping on horseback, just like in his dream. Zelda, in desperation, throws an item in Link's direction, but before he can pick it up, he finds himself standing face to face with Ganondorf himself. Ganondorf all but mops the floor up with Link, but doesn't actually hurt him. I guess he has no interest or desire to kill a little child. Hey, he may be the most evil man in the entire franchise, but that does not make him a monster. After Ganondorf leaves, Link retrieves the item Zelda had left for him, an ocarina similar to his own. Zelda appears to him in a vision telling him that this is the Ocarina of Time. She even teaches him the song on which to play that will open up the Temple of Time. Link enters the temple, places the three sacred stones, and plays the Song of Time to open the door. Inside the temple lies the legendary Master Sword. Link takes hold of the sword and pulls it from its pedestal, but is quickly greeted by a vision of Ganondorf, who thanks him for kindly opening the door of the Temple of Time. Getting into the sacred realm and plunging the land of Hyrule into absolute and utter darkness will be a cinch now thanks to us. Oops. Link gets a little lighthearted, stirs a bit, and the next thing he knows, he's all grown up and is being awakened by a strange old man in a strange chamber. The old man introduces himself as the ancient sage Rauru. He explains that the Master Sword can only be wielded by the legendary chosen savior of the world, the Hero of Time. Even though Link is the chosen one, he was apparently too young to be the savior of the world. Said no JRPG ever. Link's spirit was therefore sealed away in this chamber until a time when he would be old enough to be the Hero of Time. 7 years have apparently gone by and Link has grown into a fine young man. Unfortunately, we did just kind of open the door to the sacred realm and Ganondorf had no trouble going in, snatching the Triforce, and plunging Hyrule into absolute and utter darkness. Sorry about that, guys. Anyhow, Rauru gives Link a new mission, to travel to the land of Hyrule and locate 5 other sages. When all 6 are united in this chamber, their power will supposedly seal all evil away into the void of the realm. Rauru gives Link a medallion, thereby adding his power to ours. Link is then warped back into the Temple of Time where he meets a mysterious masked figure known only as Sheik, a member of the Sheikah tribe of ninjas. A Sheikah named Sheik. I wonder what all the rest of them are named besides Impa. Anyhow, because Link holds the Master Sword, Sheik is confident that he is in fact the Hero of Time who will save Hyrule from ultimate evil. Link, with Navi still with him, sets out to locate the rest of the sages. Sheik frequently appears to guide Link in his quest, giving him hints about the locations of the sages, as well as teaching him new magical songs to play on the Ocarina of Time, songs that can affect the area around Link or warp him to different locations. A lot has changed in the land of Hyrule in the past 7 years. Gone is Hyrule Castle, now completely replaced with Ganon's Castle, which at the moment is completely inaccessible. Link travels to 5 different temples, each time rescuing one of the sages, who warps him back to the Chamber of Sages and gives him their respective medallions, adding their powers to Link's. When all sages have been rescued and Link holds all 6 medallions, Rauru tells him to return to the Temple of Time. Link does so and is greeted yet again by Sheik, who now gives us the complete lowdown of the Triforce. Legend has it that if one seeks to obtain full control of the Triforce, one's heart must have all 3 elements in perfect balance: power, wisdom, and courage. If one's heart is not in perfect balance, the Triforce will split into 3 separate parts, and that one will only retain one of the pieces, the one most dominant in their own heart. For example, when Ganondorf entered the Sacred Realm 7 years ago thanks to our blundering carelessness, really sorry about that guys, and his heart was not in perfect balance, the Triforce split into 3 separate pieces and he retained only the Triforce of Power. The other 2 were then entrusted to 2 people chosen by destiny. Link, being the Hero of Time, as well as the main protagonist of this game, is the holder of the Triforce of Courage. Sheik is then revealed to be Princess Zelda in disguise and the holder of the Triforce of Wisdom. Zelda, now a beautiful young lady, escaped with Impa 7 years ago and disguised herself to avoid being discovered discovered by Ganondorf. Since Ganondorf holds the Triforce of Power, he was able to take over Hyrule, but his ambitions were not satisfied, and he began looking for the other two holders of Triforce, as bringing all three pieces together would allow him to take full control of the whole thing. Zelda, disguised as Sheik, managed to go unnoticed by Ganondorf for 7 years while she waited for the holder of the Triforce of Courage, whom she suspected to be Link. Unfortunately, since she's dropped the disguise, it doesn't take Ganondorf long to figure out who she is, and no sooner is she finished telling us all this than Ganondorf warps her into captivity. Well, that wasn't very wise of you, Zelda. What kind of ninja reveals their true identity anyway? Holder of Triforce of Wisdom, my cat's hairballs. Thankfully, instead of capturing Link in the very same way he captured Zelda and effectively having all three pieces of the Triforce at his disposal, Ganondorf instead dares Link to come and settle this. No, seriously, why couldn't he just capture both of them? They're in the same spot. They're like 2 feet apart from each other. Link hurries to the entrance of Ganon's castle, where all 6 sages provide a means of access allowing Link to enter. Link traverses the castle and reaches the very top, where Ganondorf is laying down some sweet devil chords on his pipe organ with the princess encased in crystal floating above. The Triforce pieces begin to resonate, signifying that all 3 pieces are present in this room, thus alerting Ganondorf to Link's presence. Link stands before the big jerk and lays a beat down. I like that Ganondorf's battle title is Great King of Evil. Might as well have just said Big Bad Guy Who's Bad. After Ganondorf is defeated and Zelda is released, the castle begins to crumble. Zelda leads Link outside, where they watch the castle completely collapse. However, they are then intercepted by Ganondorf, still alive, who then transforms into the Prince of Darkness, Ganon himself. Link lays another set of beatdowns on Ganon, and Zelda calls upon the sages, who use their powers to seal Ganon into the void of the realm. Ganon promises to one day break the seal in return, and if it takes him centuries to do so and Link and Zelda are long dead, he'll just go after their descendants. Which I guess he eventually does, because although the series contains multiple Links and Zeldas, as far as I know, there is only one Ganon/Ganondorf. For now, the Dark Age is over, and Hyrule is saved. Zelda tells Link to relinquish the Master Sword, thus closing the door between times, and uses the Ocarina to return Link back to the very moment before he took hold of the sword for the first time, thus giving him a chance to relive the 7 years that were essentially taken from him. At this point, the credits roll, but at the end, we see young Link returning to the castle courtyard, where he meets young Zelda for the first time for the second time. Or had they already met at this point? I don't know anymore. The ending gets confusing if you try and apply actual time travel logic to it, so let's just stop right there before I give myself a headache. I actually really like this story. It's a bit more complex than in previous titles, and it gave me a better understanding of the land of Hyrule and the Triforce. Not only that, but there's a lot of little elements that I appreciate. I'm actually kind of curious, is Zelda an actual Sheikah, a pure-blooded ninja, or did she just learn the Sheikah arts from Impa? Never explained, but I prefer to lean to the former. It's just so cool to think that the princess is actually a freaking ninja, although I will admit to a certain amount of disappointment to the fact that we never get to actually play as her. I get it, she's supposed to be the damsel in distress, and Link is the only one we ever play as, but I think it would have been cool to occasionally play as Sheik. Anyone who's played any Smash Bros. Game other than the first knows that Zelda is one of the characters, and although I find her clunky, slow, and not very powerful, she can transform into Sheik on the spot, who is a heck of a lot faster and more agile. Oh well. Also, an interesting factoid revealed to us in the game is the fact that Kokiri children never actually age, that they remain cute, innocent little kids forever, and since Link actually does grow up after 7 years, he is not a Kokiri, but in fact a Hylian who was taken to Kokiri Forest and placed under the care of the Great Deku Tree. I find that fascinating. Unfortunately, it never really amounts to anything significant in the game. Since the beginning of the franchise, Link was intended to be someone in whom the player could imagine and instill their own personality, so I guess giving him too much backstory might derail that. And if you're wondering why they'd even bother to give him this much backstory in the first place, admittedly, you never really learn anything about the Hylians, so at the end of the day, the game just says, see all of your friends and neighbors? You're not one of them. I also find it interesting that you can, at any point during the Dark Age, return the Master Sword to the Temple of Time. This has the effect of warping Link back to the moment when he first laid hands on it. He's back to being a little kid again, and you can continue to explore Hyrule as it was before everything changed. And then when you want to return to the Dark Age, just go back to the temple, pull the sword out, and voila! Sadly, not a whole lot actually changes during the Dark Age. Zora's fountain has frozen over, but just about every other change is minor and soon rectified. The biggest change is Hyrule Market, just outside of Hyrule Castle. What used to be a happy little town square abuzz with activity and people is now a ghost town infested with zombies. And let me tell you, these things are creepy. They come lurching towards you with a blood-curdling scream. The second they make eye contact with you, you're paralyzed for several seconds, and if they get too close to you, they'll jump on you and suck the life out of you. Get away from me! Also, there's not a whole lot of engaging dialogue beyond, do this and don't do that. The only reason I mention this is that I really like the bickering banter you get after you defeated the twin Rova sisters. It's just cheap humor, but it made me chuckle, and I found myself wishing for more of that in the game. One thing I really do like is the characterization of the sages. These aren't just generic old men with long white beards that you've never seen or heard of until you first enter the chamber. Well, okay, Rauru totally is. nor are they beautiful young women like in A Link to the Past, who despite being easier on the eyes, are still complete strangers to you. With the exception of Rauru, every single sage is someone with whom you have interacted with at some point or another as young Link, sometimes very significantly and sometimes not so much. Most of these guys are just normal residents from different areas who didn't even realize they were chosen to be sages. You've got Saria, Link's childhood friend from Kokiri. Even though she's not too significant in the big scheme of things, the established fact that she's someone whom Link has known for a long time gives me a slightly different perspective of her. You've got Darunia, the boss of the Gorons. He didn't trust Link at first, but after we did him no small amount of favors, he officially dubbed Link his honorary brother. You've got Princess Ruto of Zora, Link's self-proclaimed future wife. The less said about her, the better. You've got Impa, Zelda's bodyguard and caretaker. Even though her role in this game is pretty minor, we should recognize her name, which was dropped all the way back at the beginning of Zelda 2, although I'm assuming that it's not the same Impa. And you've got Nabooru of the Gerudos. The Gerudos are actually a race of thieves consisting almost entirely of women. Every 100 years a man is born, although I'm a little confused as to how this all-girl group manages to even procreate, considering, despite what the woke SJWs of 2021 would have you believe, it takes a female and a male to make babies, and that man is chosen to be the leader of the Gerudos. This century's male Gerudo is Ganondorf himself. Yeah, dude actually has a traceable origin, but Nabooru does not support him nor follow him. She's somewhat of an exception among the other sages in that you never actually meet her or hear about her until long after you've entered the Chamber of Sages. In fact, you probably won't meet her until you've rescued all of the others, but you do have to warp back to being a little kid to even be able to meet her for the first time anyway, so the consistency is still sort of there. Another thing I like, early on in this game you can meet this sweet little girl named Malon. Her father, Talon, owns a ranch with lots of horses. Malon introduces us to a little pony named Epona. At first, Epona is afraid of Link, but if you play a certain song on your ocarina, a song that Malon is constantly singing, Epona warms up to you. 7 years later, you can reunite with Malon, now a beautiful young lady who is still singing that dang song, and Epona, now a fine sturdy horse. And you can actually take Epona with you for the rest of the game. She's nothing more than a quicker means of transportation, but I really grew fond of her and characterized her in my mind as a friend of Link. This could just be the simple fact that I really love horses. I think they're beautiful and majestic creatures. And I think I'm done talking about story. That was much more than I expected from a Nintendo game. Now let's talk about gameplay. The previous Zelda titles were all about topographical exploration. This game focuses on 3D exploration. Same concept, different camera angle. The world of Hyrule doesn't seem nearly as big as the first two Zelda games, or even in A Link to the Past. Unfortunately, it's just about as happening as the first two. In A Link to the Past, everything seemed more vibrant and alive, but in this game, everything's just kind of bland and empty. I'm speaking mainly of the overworld itself. There's just nothing really exciting out here, aside from some enemies you can fight. The villages and towns are charming enough. I especially like the Lost Woods, which is a little sub-area in Kokiri Forest. You won't find too many people here, but the ones you do are dancing and singing to this catchy little ditty that I just can't seem to get tired of. Our world map isn't nearly as detailed as A Link to the Past, but it's still a heck of a lot better than that rectangular piece of garbage from the first Zelda game. And since Hyrule isn't quite so vast this time, you shouldn't ever find yourself getting lost. One thing that's kind of neat is that some of the different areas have different entrances to other areas. Goron City, for example, has an exit leading directly into the Lost Woods. Zora's Fountain has an exit leading to Lake Hylia. I like this, makes everything feel like it's more connected, and it helps with getting where you need to go a little bit. As I mentioned in the story, during the Dark Age you can warp back to being young Link 7 years ago and fully explore Hyrule in that time. This is kind of similar to warping between the Light and Dark worlds in A Link to the Past, but it's not done nearly so often. Most of the time it's for optional side quests and item fetching. Matter of fact, I can only recall one instance in where the main story requires you to warp back to the good old days. Kind of a shame, especially after playing a game like Chrono Trigger, which has side quests you can do in the past and benefits you can reap in the future. The closest you get here are these magic beans that you can plant in the past that have sprouted into magic platforms in the future that you can ride on to reach hidden items. As a kid, roaming around Hyrule is done on foot, making it that much bigger and longer, but as an adult, you can acquire the horse Epona, on whose back you can ride, making getting around a bit less tedious, although she won't be able to enter villages with you. A huge gimmick in this game is the passage of time. When you're out in the overworld, the hours of the day actually pass in real time. Not on the same scale though, not like 1 hour of real time equals 1 hour of Hyrule time. That would be insane. I don't actually know what the scale is, but the time from morning to night seemed to clock around 2 minutes and 37 seconds. And that was just from the moment the rooster crows to the moment the owl hoots. I don't know if that's meant to be 12 hours or what. When you enter a village, time stops flowing and remains frozen on whatever time it was when you entered until you get back on the field, and in dungeons, time is irrelevant. There are a few items here and there, and areas that are opened or closed off, depending on what time it is, and a few enemies that only spawn at certain times. Another gimmick is the Ocarina of Time, with which Link can use the power of music to do different things. When you pull out the ocarina, you can play a song by inputting notes via button commands. These are mainly C buttons on the N64 controller, but some of the later songs require the use of the A button. Different songs accomplish different results. The most obvious is the Sun song, which allows you to instantly toggle between nighttime and daytime. Even though time doesn't flow in villages, this song still works in villages. The Song of Storms brings rain, wind, and thunder to your surrounding environment. This is only useful in a few specific situations. Zelda's Lullaby is sort of a password that can instantly earn you the trust of a few individuals, and anytime you see the Triforce logo on a wall or a floor panel, playing this song will cause something to happen. Epona's song calls Epona to you at any point on the overworld, which is pretty useful considering that it is possible to leave her at the entrance to a village, which will lead you to another place, and before you know it, you've forgotten where you left her. And there are many songs that can warp you to different areas. When you first leave Kokiri Forest, Saria gives you her fairy ocarina, but when Zelda gives you the Ocarina of Time, the fairy ocarina is removed from your inventory. There's really no in-game difference between the two. The game just wanted you to familiarize yourself with the concept of using the ocarina to do certain stuff before the story actually provides you with the real ocarina. At the beginning of the game, young Link is almost completely bare, no sword, no shield, nothing. Eventually you'll get a sword and then a shield. Though the sword is your main method of attack, you can get some other things as well, like Deku Nuts, which you can throw, the Deku Slingshot, the Boomerang, bombs, and even a few magic spells and a magic-based sword attack. As an adult, okay, time out. Can we please stop saying young Link and adult Link? Young Link looks to be maybe 7 or 8, 9 tops. There's a 7-year gap between the two. Adult Link probably isn't any older than 16, so he's still technically young Link. From now on, I'm just going to call them Little Link and Teen Link. Anyway, Teen Link can't use certain items that Little Link can use, like the Boomerang, which is kinda sad considering it's even more awesome in this game than in previous titles, Deku Branches, Deku Nuts, or the Slingshot. On the flip side, Teen Link gets access to the Hookshot, the Fairy Bow, and the Megaton Hammer. Little Link can't use any of that. Both can use the bombs, the magic spells, and the magic-based sword attack, the Lens of Truth, and the Ocarina. I'm gonna be honest here, the magic spells and the sword attack are extremely situational, and I never found myself needing to use them most of the time. The hookshot feels like it's been severely downgraded from A Link to the Past. You can only grapple onto certain items, and it has a ridiculously short range, although you can upgrade it in the Water Temple, giving it a much better range. For controls, Link can run, slash with his sword, block with a shield, and tuck and roll along the ground. Link has no jump command, but when you walk off an edge, he will automatically jump. This can feel a bit broken at times, especially when you're trying to climb down a narrow shaft, and when you reach for the ladder, Link just hops to the other side. But other than that, it serves me well. The sword is mapped to the B button. By default, sword and shield are strapped to Link's back, and pressing the B button draws your sword, and pressing it again in rapid succession lets you hack and slash. Pressing the A button sheaths your sword. Pressing the R button draws your shield, allowing you to block oncoming projectiles. There are 3 swords and shields in this game. The sword that you get as Little Link isn't much more than a dagger and is inaccessible as Teen Link, who by default has the Master Sword. The third sword, the Big Goron Sword, is an optional upgrade for Teen Link. It's much more powerful and makes quick work of bigger enemies, however it requires Link to hold it with 2 hands, so you can't draw your shield while this sword is drawn. Pressing the A button while this sword is drawn causes Link to duck, his shield now protecting his back, so you can still block enemy projectiles this way. You just lose some flexibility. As for shields, Little Link can use the Deku and Hylian shields, although the Hylian shield is so big that Little Link can't draw it and can only duck with it on his back. Teen Link can of course use it normally, as well as the Mirror Shield, which can also reflect light. Everything else, the Ocarina, the Boomerang, the arrows, hookshot, hammer, or whatever other items you may happen to pick up, are used with the C buttons. C up is reserved for first-person camera controls, while C down, left, and right are used for items. You can go into your inventory, pick an item, and select which C button you want that map to, and then pressing that C button while on the action screen brings up that item. As Little Link, I mapped the Boomerang to C left, Ocarina to C down, and whatever else I needed to C right. As Teen Link, same deal but with the hookshot at C left, but that's just me. Another big control gimmick is Z targeting, which is just a lock-on feature. Pressing the Z button causes a reticule to appear on a nearby item or enemy, and you'll be locked onto that thing. When locked onto something, Link will take his lock-on stance, which I'll just refer to as Z mode. If no targets are around or in range, then you have to hold down the Z button to stay in Z mode, but when you lock onto something, you can take your finger off the button and will remain in Z mode. While in Z mode, Link can slash his sword like normal, but pressing the A button here while holding the control stick forward will cause him to perform a forward jump slash, which does a bit more damage than the normal slash. Pressing it while holding the control stick backward causes him to perform a backwards flip, which is effective in dodging many enemy attacks. Pressing the R button while in Z mode draws your shield like normal, but this time it's pointed directly at your target, making blocking their projectiles a bit easier. And while moving left or right on the control stick while in Z mode, Link will sort of strafe, keeping his eye on your target. Projectile weapons such as arrows, boomerangs, or even the hookshot Shot, which does do damage to enemies, do work quite well with Z targeting, whereas using those types of weapons outside of Z mode switches the perspective of first person in which you can use the control stick to manually aim. Z targeting works pretty well most of the time, but I swear sometimes it feels like you have to get right on top of an enemy before it's in Z range. My least favorite enemies are these stupid little bats that like to dive bomb you. By the time they're in Z range, it's almost too late for me to do anything. I suppose it's only fair to acknowledge Navi, our little fairy buddy that has been assigned to us by the Great Deku Tree. As her name implies, she is our in-game navigator. She gives us a few hints and reminders of where to go and what to do next. Most of the time she can just be ignored. If you're going about your business and hear her yell, "Hey!" you can see what she has to say by pressing the C button up, or just ignore her, but there are a few times where she stops you dead in your tracks to tell you something. She doesn't do this much though, and usually when she does, it's important. I've got nothing against her, she's not that much of a pace breaker, and her voice is obnoxiously adorable. Listen. This game's objective is structured much like A Link to the Past. The objective of the first Zelda game was as straightforward as you could possibly get. Collect the 8 pieces of Triforce and defeat Ganon. Zelda 2 was quite similar. Deliver the 6 crystals to their respective temples and rescue the princess. A Link to the Past gave us a mere 3 items to collect at first, plus the Master Sword, but then events unfolded and we were tasked with rescuing the sages. This game pretty much follows that formula. First you go through the Deku Tree, get the first Sacred Stone, then you come to the Overworld for the first time, locate the dungeons that contain the other 2 Sacred Stones, work your way to the Temple of Time, grab the Master Sword, wake up in the Dark World, and then locate and navigate to the 5 temples leading to one of the sages. One of the main things that stood out to me in A Link to the Past was getting through the dungeons, more specifically, the puzzle solving. I really enjoyed it, especially since the game was designed in such a way that it wasn't too difficult to figure out what you were supposed to do and where you were supposed to go. The dungeons of the first Zelda game were just mazes that you needed to find the quickest route through before you ran out of keys, and finding secrets on the Overworld required extreme trial and error and then memorization, or, now you could just get on the internet and use a guide. There are some really obscure secrets on the Overworld in this game, like playing the Song of Storms in a certain area to reveal a sinkhole, but in these cases, the rewards are just optional things that you may or may not need. Anything of story significance should be easy enough to locate. Sometimes it's simply a matter of making the best use of the tools you have. As for the temples, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't actually find them as entrancing as A Link to the Past, sadly, because I was looking forward to some more awesome 3D puzzle solving. There's still enough of it here, but I can only do so many block and switch puzzles before I start getting bored. Candle puzzles were admittedly pretty fun, as sometimes I could just dip a Deku branch in some fire and light the candles, but in some of the later dungeons, I couldn't do that, and I had to do something like shoot an arrow at a candle through an already lit candle so the arrow catches fire. But then I was eventually given fire arrows, which kinda took the fun out of that. Like previous titles, you've got keys to collect that open doors, allowing you to venture further in, and a big key to open the door to the boss room, as well as a map and compass. Many of the temples were fun enough, but not very memorable. None of them were terribly tedious, save for the Shadow Temple, which was my least favorite. I didn't hate it by any means, but its gimmick was using the lens of truth to discover invisible platforms or walls, and sometimes invisible enemies. This just didn't require any brain power to me. I mean, in the first few rooms, I was like, okay, how do I get through here? But once you use the lens a couple of times and discovered enough invisible floors, you get the idea, and eventually you just start turning the thing on in every room you go to. Yeah, it uses up magic power, but just like in the previous Zelda games, enemies drop what you need most of the time, so you should never have trouble keeping the magic meter filled. And if you've played through this dungeon enough, I imagine you might even start memorizing where all the hidden stuff is and won't need to use the lens at all. The only 2 temples that really stood out to me were the water and spirit temples. Apparently a lot of people complain about the water temple, but I actually really enjoyed it. The main gimmick here is raising and lowering the water levels to reach different heights leading to different passageways. The main central room is a big square-shaped structure with lots of doors on it as well as doors on the walls, all at different heights, and you'll need to raise and lower the water levels accordingly. This just never got old for me and I had a really fun time with it. I especially love the room with the hookshot panels that requires you to raise and lower the water levels, hook to different panels, lower them, stand on top of them, raise them, it's all great. I also love the mini boss fight against Shadow Link, although he turned out to be a complete joke with use of the Megaton Hammer. Shadow Link, you're awesome, you're epic, but they gotta stop making you so stupid easy. The Spirit Temple was my all-time favorite. Its puzzles were no more or less of a brain workout than the Water Temple, but it relied heavily on using your mirror shield to reflect light. This was just so cool in concept, very Indiana Jones-esque. I've also already mentioned the banter that goes on between the twin Rova sisters after you defeated them. Oh man, this is some funny stuff, and even though I'm not ready to talk about the soundtrack yet, this temple has one of my favorite tracks, so yeah, this is like the perfect temple. As was the case in previous Zelda games and in Metroid titles, there's more to do than simply plowing through the story. There's a lot of upgrades and items to collect, and you can spend a healthy amount of time doing so. You can play minigames to acquire pouches and quivers that increase the maximum amount of bombs and arrows you can carry, but to be honest, I was quite conservative with how I use my arrows and bombs and never found myself running low, and since I don't much care for the minigames, I'd suggest that some of these upgrades aren't terribly useful. Link is once again rocking his usual heart meter system. There's a new heart waiting for you at the end of every boss fight at the end of the dungeons, and there are a number of heart pieces you can collect if you know where to look. These work just like in A Link to the Past, where every 4 pieces equals a whole heart. See how many hearts I have? You can get this many plus one more. I apparently missed a heart piece somewhere along the way and didn't feel like backtracking to look for it. There's also bottles you can collect, which work a lot like the bottles in A Link to the Past, where you can fill them up with fairies and other such things to be used at a later time. You'll need to map these to C buttons like other items. And of course our main currency is rupees. The bosses are okay. There's one at the end of each dungeon. Some of them are fairly challenging, some are babyishly easy, and some are just tedious. The final area is quite enjoyable. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and call it my favorite final area in a Zelda game so far. The final area in Zelda 1 just threw you into a big old maze and piled tons of crap on you, and the final area in Zelda 2, while a tad more bearable, basically did the same thing. A Link to the Past's final area relied a bit more on puzzles, some of them kind of nerve-wracking, and was much more enjoyable, but this one was just so much fun. It isn't terribly intimidating, like it's not a huge area with traps and enemies for you to trudge through. You walk in, slide by some laser statues, and then reach a massive doorway that you obviously need to go through, but it's blocked by 6 elemental barriers. There are 6 smaller doors along the outer wall, each leading to a relatively short passage in which you'll have to solve some nifty little puzzles, all dead-ending with the core of the elemental barrier, which takes 1 shot from a light arrow to dispel, and then whatever sage corresponds to that element will appear and dispel that particular barrier. Then you'll be warped back to the main room where you choose another doorway and do the same thing. After all 6 barriers have been dispelled, you enter through the big door and traverse a tier progression passageway with big enemies of different levels of difficulty, starting with the dinosaur-type enemies, the Stalfoses, and then the Iron Knuckles. Although I do admit I would have placed the Iron Knuckles before the Stalfoses, as I find them to be easier enemies. Yeah, they really pack a punch, and if you get hit, it really frickin' hurts. But they're also incredibly slow and predictable, and when you hit them enough times, their shields break, and then anytime you hit them, they do an ouch, that hurts recoil animation, so you can just keep slashing them at this point. Stalfoses, on the other hand, are faster, and they dance around a lot, and they can't be hurt until they lower their shields to slash at you, so you have to dodge the attack, but try to land one on your own before they raise their shields again. I definitely found them to be more of a challenge. Anyway, once you reach the top of the tower, you can face off against Ganondorf, who isn't terribly difficult, but can be annoying your first couple of times against him. Carelessness is your biggest enemy here. Stay alert and focused, and this boss should be relatively painless. After the battle, the castle begins to crumble, and you have to follow Zelda out of here. I really do like this, as it's kind of like a Metroid-style escape sequence. You've even got a timer. The only thing to note here is that on one floor, Zelda will get caught by 2 Stalfoses, and you'll need to be quick about defeating them, as you don't want to waste time. Once you've made it out, the castle collapses and it's time to face off against the final boss, Ganon. Well, I like his appearance, and the music, and the epic feel of the battle, but in terms of raw difficulty, yeah, not so much. You'll most likely take some hits your first time through, but as long as you have some spare fairies stored up in your bottles, you should be fine. For the first phase, you'll lose your Master Sword and have to use something else. If you didn't collect the Big Goron Sword, you can use the hammer. For the second phase, you have to use the Master Sword. I didn't realize this at first and switched to the Big Goron Sword because I naturally assumed it would do more damage. And I must have hacked at this dude's tail for a solid 20 minutes before it suddenly clicked in my head. He won't die unless you deliver the final blow with the Master Sword. Still, it's a pretty epic battle that ends the game rather nicely. The graphics are what you'd expect from an N64 title. Everything's bright and colorful, but very polygonal. I do like the lighting effects during the rising and setting sun between morning and nighttime. Adds an atmospheric touch to it. I also like how Little Link's arms and legs are quite short and stubby. It's a subtle little thing to emphasize his aging, because aside from height, there's not a whole lot of noticeable differences between the 2 Links. Although I will admit to a certain amount of confusion at the sight of Teen Link's earrings. I know plenty of game characters, male and female, wear earrings, but Little Link doesn't have that, so that means that sometime during his 7-year slumber, somebody took the time to pierce his ears? Maybe I'm looking too deep into this, but the designers did make a point of giving him earrings, so... but whatever. I do like the expression on Zelda here. She definitely looks sad and remorseful concerning her actions that have led to this mess. The same, however, cannot be said for Link. This guy has 2 facial expressions, his casual neutral face and his oh snap face, and he switches between the 2 in the most digital binary way possible. True, false, on, off, 1, 0. I also really love Ganon's final appearance. One thing I do not care for is the appearance of the fairies. And I'm not talking about the little balls of light with wings that buzz around like Navi. I'm talking about the ones at the fairy fountains that teach you new magic spells and heal you when you need it. These were a staple in A Link to the Past, and in that game they were quite beautiful. So I was expecting a lot from this game's 3D graphics. Heck, the Gorons even say they're beautiful. So are they? Ah, what the heck? Yeah, these things are creepy. Just look at that seductive pose, those soulless eyes, that creepy smile. She looks like she's about to eat Link for dinner. And that creepy cackling doesn't help matters either. I'm just waiting for her to start licking her lips. It's nice that these fairies heal you up when you need it, but I was expecting them to reveal that they'd already laid claim to Link's soul and he must forever remain their slave or something. I'm guessing the designers were trying to implement some ironic humor here. You know, fairies are generally depicted as being beautiful or adorable and they wanted to shake up the status quo, but good night, I think they got a little carried away. Wonder how many 90s kids were left traumatized from this. The music is okay. The soundtrack was once again composed by Koji Kondo. Most of what you hear is nice and atmospheric, but none of it is entirely memorable. I do like how the overworld theme seems to change depending on what you're doing at the moment, and the final boss theme is quite ominous and foreboding. My favorite tunes include the ever-catchy Lost Woods theme, the relaxing Zora's Fountain theme, and the chilling Spirit Temple theme. Like much of Kondo's work that I've listened to, this gets the job done. This game is ranked very high in the Zelda franchise, pretty high among N64 titles, and significantly high among video games in general. For me, it's okay. I'm glad I played it, and I do see myself revisiting this game in the future, and I did have a lot of fun at times, but honestly, this game was kind of a drag for me at first. I was really excited after having so much fun with A Link to the Past, but this one just didn't suck me in at first, as evidenced by the fact that this review took so long for me to make. I did eventually get into it and started having fun, and even got to a point where I didn't want to stop playing, but it sure took me a long time to get to that point. And to me, that's really a problem because I want the games I play to capture my attention right from the beginning. Otherwise, I'll get bored and just stop playing and then miss out on all the fun that comes later on. The only reason I trudged through this one was because I made a promise to myself to play through as many of the main Zelda titles as I could. And seeing how much praise this one gets, I guess I was just expecting more. And I can already hear you saying that I'm too used to platformer shooters and racing games to fully appreciate something like this. I have two things to respond to that with. One, I've played enough RPGs that certainly can take some time to grow on me, and two, A Link to the Past grabbed me from the very beginning, which is why I will rank that game higher than this one. Now, I will say that this game is no slouch. Any problems I have with it really depend on what I personally look for in a game. Objectively speaking, this game is very polished and solid, has a fascinating storyline, and even though I criticize some of the elements about the graphics, they serve this game quite well. And I definitely got more out of this game than the first two Zelda games put together. So yeah, still a fun game once you get into it, and I'm sure that if and when I play it again, I'll have more fun with it than I did this time. As I said, I plan to review as many of the main Zelda titles as I can. I don't plan on doing any spin-off titles or side games, which is why I didn't bother doing Link's Awakening, and why I don't have any plans to do Majora's Mask. So if you enjoyed this review, please be sure to check out some of my other reviews, and be sure to check out my musical projects, and maybe even hit the subscribe button. Pieces!